Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Andy, and we're going to start today by talking about, again, formative for instruction and talking about formative assessment as part of instruction. Now, you have on your screen here 4 examples of some traditional best practices in formative assessment as part of instruction. These are quite common checks for understanding, often employed during your lesson. Now, I'd like for you to take a moment to consider one, or if you've got the space for it, more than one of these, perhaps two, and describe in the chat either one great benefit of using that specific check for understanding during the lesson or one of its drawbacks. We've got turn and talk, we've got using exit tickets at the end of a lesson, we've got whiteboards, and self-reporting, something like fist to five, or does everyone get it? How comfortable do you feel? So take the next maybe 30 seconds to think and contribute one drawback or one benefit of using any one of these checks for understanding. I'm going to start my timer here. Ooh, turn and talk, a popular one at the start here. Nice, Stephanie. Thank you, Madison. Thank you, Beth. So if you're still writing, go ahead and finish up that thought. Thanks, Dr. Christensen. No problem. I'm sure you got a lot of spots that you're bouncing around too. So be good, be well, wherever you wind up. All right, if you're continuing to type out your final thoughts there, please do so. We would love to see them. Very nice, Mary. Thank you. So, as many of you have already pointed out, these are part of the classics. These are this is in the canon for the reason. This is sort of the best of list because one thing I would also say is that these are often easy to employ. In many cases, it is just a matter of maybe a slide in a presentation or a piece of paper with a prepared question. And a lot of these can both get students being social, it can provide opportunities to break from the lesson. We can gather information. Students get the opportunity to process and reflect. But as a few of you have mentioned, there are some drawbacks to these as well. They can be difficult to collect detailed data from, as Brandon mentioned, absolutely. Not only that, if we are using pieces of paper or a whiteboard, then that is upon us to kind of document those, keep them, and put that somewhere that we can come back to. Also, Mary mentioned self-reporting. It's good that they can give you some details on what they understand and what they don't, but that does rely on students being metacognitive and being forthcoming with what they actually think they know and they don't. And for all of these, if these are happening outside of a platform like Formative, then these are sort of ephemeral. They are there for a moment for the teacher to gather data on as quickly as they can, and then they might be gone. So what we hope to do with our time today with Formative is to capitalize on the benefits of these practices as often as we can and minimize their drawbacks so that we can, for instance, use a tool like either an exit ticket or a whiteboard where students might be demonstrating knowledge of what we've taught and providing evidence of that in the ways that are the best practices of whiteboards, where they are doing this and we are seeing their work and able to refer to it, but documenting this and coming back and being able to refer back to it at any time. So whether it's one-on-one conferences with the student, parent-teacher conferences, or PLCs or grade level conferences where we are discussing a student and their work, we can draw upon every interaction they have had with our assessments, with our instruction, so that it is the actual students' words, their language, the videos they've created, and their work that informs our conversations and the next steps that we take with them. So, what we'll aim for today is using formative as a tool to deliver our lessons so that the real time data that we capture, things that might emerge from exit tickets or self reporting, whiteboard work, even turn and talks, interactions between peers, might be something that gets captured, documented, and can be referred back to as evidence of student learning, or at least give us some sense of what we might do next. And if the event or if it should come to pass that we see in the evidence or the data evidence that students need more practice opportunities with something, then we'll also look at what formative might provide to help us do that in a way that is engaging, it is accountable, and in some cases, as quickly as an automatic couple clicks of a button. So that's what we're after in our time today. But again, one last time, please be forthcoming in the chat as to what I can do to help direct today's time towards what might best support you. So we're going to begin with what exists in formative to help you build engaging and interactive lessons. Now, if you've been using something like Google Slides or PowerPoints or any other presentation software, we will look at ways of importing some of your already developed materials and best practices into formative. So we'll look at ways that you can both begin with a blank canvas, but also how you can incorporate some of your already incorporated best practices. And we'll be looking as well as how we can incorporate the newest technology to make this work even easier and more aligned. So we're going to start by looking at what is probably the most simplest form of getting a sense of what formative might offer for your presentations, what it might look like, in other words, to use formative as a lesson delivery mechanism. And so to do that, we're going to be turning to our library. And our library is another great place for those of you that are brand new to formative to get a sense of what's available when you're using formative. We are a platform for instruction and assessment so that you can capture student data and engage them in rich learning experiences, either as part of your direct instruction or as part of activities, quizzes, summative assessments, etc. We'll look at lots of different use cases in our time today. But for those of you that are quite practiced in using formative, the first place we're going to turn our attention are our starter lessons to give you a sense of what it might look like to use formative as your lesson delivery mechanism. So in place of your Google Slides or your PowerPoint that you might have used, or maybe it's just even a PDF that you're presenting to the class that students are interacting with in some way. So I'm going to be turning over here to my live site to direct us towards our library. So those of you that are brand new, when you log into Formative, you'll find a space that looks like this, and this is what it will look like for your home page. I just want to check. It looks like you all use ClassLink to sign into Formative. So if you're brand new, like never logged in before, look for Formative on your ClassLink portal. So the little check icon or language indicating that that is formative. You may be asked to input your school. You may or may not. I'm not sure. Integrating through ClassLink, you probably have fewer things that you need to input, but you'll probably get a brief tour, some questions you'll be asked about what you teach, etc. But you'll find, thank you, Dr. Christensen. So we got a link right there to your ClassLink portal. I know it's always titled different things, whichever district you're in. But you'll eventually land on your formative homepage. And it's here where you'll be able to add classes. You'll see any recent activities. These will be your assessments, your lessons. And we're going to look at our library today as a place to find inspiration, either for our lessons or if we're brand new, you may use the library to get a sense of what's possible with your formative accounts for other assessment items like quizzes, summative assessments, checks for understanding that are discrete in and of themselves. So we're going to go with our library first. I want to check our public settings here. I don't need star here. I want to stay in public because it is these starter lessons where we're going to begin our time today, and you're going to have some chances to explore. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our starter lessons, and I'm going to share a link directly so that you can access it with just a click in the chat. But remember, these were the first option for me when I accessed my library on the left-hand side. And you can see that these lessons are broken down by content area, and they were developed by staff here at Formative. So when I open up one of these starter lessons, I can begin by choosing my content area and then the grade that I teach. So here I'm going to look for our ninth grade. We're going to be looking back at this lesson throughout our time together today. So I'm going to open up this periodic table lesson. And I've got a preview so I get to see the actual contents of this lesson from the title slide with its stated objectives to the videos that students would use to get their introduction to the topic to the questions that we pose to get a sense of how well students have understood the lesson and can apply their learning into new spaces. So in this case, applying their understanding of the periodic table and answering the questions, everything from matching kind of questions to order questions, short answers, as well as, what else do we have here? Drag and drop questions. All of these available to me. And if I add this, you can see that the button I clicked to add that formative now transforms to go to this formative, which allows me to open this formative in my account. It appears similar to a Google presentation where I have my slide tray on the left, and then I have in the center a visual of what is in that slide. So my title slide, the video itself. I've got my first question here. I can view them over here as well. Here's my drag and drop question. And I can modify any of these items as well, both by clicking into them and changing anything about the language. I can add hints. I can also change the question type in many cases. So clicking on the title of the question type, in this case, it's a drag and drop question. So I can change some of these. Now, I do want to say changing some of these is a little easier than others. So for instance, a short answer question, like the final question here, this is easier to change from a short answer to something like an audio answer or a video response than it would be to change something like what was the last one that we were looking at? A drag and drop question to an audio question, simply because going from one thing to another is a little easier when we're starting with something like a short answer or an audio response. So some things are a little easier to change from one thing to another, but you have ultimate flexibility here, and you can change these in any way that you like so that they are capturing data on what matters to you and in the way that matters to you. So these are all available again. You've got ELA, science, social studies, and math broken down by grade band, accessible to you in your library. And again, if yours is anything like mine, it defaults to your private library. So if you're not seeing any results, it may just need to, you may be needing to click public or get rid of any filters that might show up in this space. And then you have a number of those starter lessons available for your perusal here to, again, acclimate you to what it might look like to create materials informative that would be the basis of your lesson, what you deliver to the class, front of class, and how you capture insights into how well students have internalized what they've learned and how they can apply it to their learning in via the questions that accompany it or any that you would add. So I'm going to jump back here for a moment. Our first activity is going to be exploring the starter lessons. Again, there is a direct link to this folder in the chat. I'll share that again too in case you joined or lost track of where the chat is. And I want you to take some time with these, exploring those materials, adding any that feel relevant, even if it is just to get some practice with modifying them, either by changing the question type, something about the way the question is worded, or even getting ahead on adding standards to those specific questions. And that is something that we're going to cover next as we go into creating lessons from scratch. And taking a bit more creativity into ways that we use these. So not exactly using templates, but starting from the work that we've either done previously or that we do in formative. So, Melissa, these lessons are designed to be teacher-led, but as we'll see, there's always the option to release either individuals or the whole class to what we call student-paced mode, so that if we got the sense that students were ready to move through those materials at their own pace, they would no longer be sort of beholden to our pacing. So it may be even that you start the lesson and you are displaying on every student's screen with your controls the slides or the materials that you want to control the pacing of, and then you determine who's ready and who's not to go at their own pace. So as you explore, I'll tell you, Melissa, and anyone else too, explore some of these resources. You're going to have 5 minutes for this. We can take more if we need it, but this is your first chance to acclimate yourself to what's informative. So, starter lessons for those of you that are familiar with using formative and its functionality. If you're brand new to using formative, you identified as a one. Maybe you spend some time in the home page just exploring how it is situated and organized. Or maybe you go to the library and rather than looking for starter lessons, you stay in the public space and search for something related to your content area to get a sense of what we've put together to help support any of those search items that you might find. So in Algebra 1, for instance, here we've got courses. So everything from student-facing materials to teacher-facing materials, sort of getting a sense of what might be offered with Informative. I'll be here for any questions, but let's take 5 minutes and I'm going to start my timer, but that will bring us right to the hour mark. So 10 a.m., expect to hear from me again. This is an opportunity for me to pause. So now that you've looked at some of the lessons that are available as templates, we'll look at building things from scratch, informative, step by step, so that you've got even more options to create something that truly meets your needs and your students and your content area, and that also respects all of the hard work that you've done outside of formative up to this point to have really rich, engaging lesson material. So I'm going to jump back to our home page here so that we can look at some additional ways to use formative beyond just what's in the library to get in touch with what we have. So whenever you are on your home page, which you can get by using this left-hand navigation panel, and if at any point you don't see it, it may be because it's hidden behind those three vertical lines. So you can access the home page here, and you've got an opportunity to create something from scratch. Now, our formatives are things that are most closely associated with like activities. So it might be a quiz, an exit ticket, a do now, where you are building in opportunities for students to interact with something and to show or demonstrate mastery or evidence of understanding on any given topic. Today's session is mostly about lessons, so that's where we're going to start here. I'm going to show you what's available when we create a new lesson. But if you're brand new to formative, you may find yourself gravitating towards this formative button to get your hands dirty with a little bit of quizzes, tests, checks for understanding, maybe even just one well-crafted question, getting a sense of the answer options and what we can find within formative. Many of those points which we'll be touching on with lessons. I think you'll see that there's a great deal of overlap in how you might use lessons or formatives as part of your use of this platform. But I'm going to go to lesson first, and I now have a new lesson. You can see they all start as untitled. I'm going to give this one a quick title so that I can quickly identify it when I go back to my home page and look at my list of activities. And here I have a list of options that will appear familiar to me, whether I've created a formative or a lesson. I've got the opportunities to add questions or content. I can import presentations directly from Google Slides. I can draw a slide, so I'm using my cursor to draw images, or I can add lesson blocks. We'll look at each of these in a little bit more detail, one by one. I'm going to do add question or content to demonstrate that we've got two things available to us here. We've got content You might think of these like inputs or stimuli. These are what students are getting as something to work with. Anything from an image they might be analyzing to paired passages or two texts that they might read, a specific slide that they might be looking at, videos that they might watch, text that they might read, or audio. I can choose any one of these to have students analyze, compare. These are something that they are interacting with and ultimately demonstrating their understanding via one of the 20 different question types that we might add either immediately after or alongside the content that we've added. So if you're used to using formative for quizzes, other assessments, this looks very familiar. Um, Let me jump here. So again, your content, these are the things that students are receiving, and then the questions are how they're demonstrating some level of understanding. And if you're using slides like Google presentations, you might use slides as your content to upload, and you'll see that you have a space to pick directly from the presentations in your Google Drive where you can begin to upload previously created materials so that they are available to you in formative. Now, a couple notes here. You'll see that when you add slides in formative, animations may not function any longer. Videos aren't hyperlinked, or sorry, aren't embedded in the slides the way they might have been when you created them in Google Drive or Google Presentations. So if that feels like it's a deal breaker for you, this might not be the option that you take advantage of right now. But if your slides are largely text and image based, then you can add all of those to have them available to you and your students as slides within formative. So all of these now available to me, and I can now take advantage of the functionality in formative to add opportunities for students to actually do some of these things live on formative, capturing data on how well every student can do each one of these items or actions. And on a lot of these, because these slides are imported as images, I can add questions simply by clicking on the slide or the image of the slide anywhere that I want to, like I'll demonstrate now. So I just clicked over number 1 there, and I want to now add a multiple choice question so that when I display this slide to students, they have the chance to answer this question live on their devices as an opportunity for them to demonstrate understanding. Think of this as your opportunity to check for understanding, maybe in the middle of a lesson, the beginning of a lesson, wherever it might come. My only need at this point is to notice that there's A, B, and C, and I need to delete D. I don't need to repeat the question because students will see that question 1 corresponds to this portion of the slide. I can do the same thing here for question 2, repeating those same steps. I'm going to do the same thing for 3, so that if I have slides that look something like this, I've got a built-in opportunity to check for understanding quickly that will capture data, help me break it down by student, analyze those data in a way that helps me identify trends and adjust my pacing with just a couple clicks. So if you're importing your presentations, you've got lots of great chances to help instructionalize or add assessments that are interactive and help you see what's going on in a student's head as part of your lessons when you import these over from formative. So that's available either by pressing slide, or I'll show this same steps again when I click create and then lesson from my home page. I can also import directly from Google Slides by selecting this space. And it brings me to the same place where I can browse through my presentations or search specifically for those that I might pull up and import directly. So these two options both allow you the chance to import directly from Google Slides. Drawing a slide, one we won't discuss much today, but next I think we're going to lesson blocks, but let me quickly review. Oh no, before we get to lesson blocks, I want to point out something that you have access to as part of your subscription this year. That is your library and your item bank. So I'm going to navigate away from this lesson, the one I just created to demonstrate the ability to add presentations directly. I'm going to come back to my sample lesson here, but I can do this on any one of the formatives or lessons that I've created. When I want to add a new item, in this case, I can add a slide by clicking this blue plus button in the bottom left-hand corner. One of my options, again, content here, my first column, and then 3 columns of questions. I can access my item bank by clicking this button here and then select item bank. So this is just allowing me to search my library by default. But if I select item bank in the upper left-hand corner, but the third option, I can now filter by specific question types. So if I want to get a sense of what drag and drop might look like, I've got pre-created items that I can add to my formative or to my lesson simply by identifying those that I like or previewing them. If I click on it, I get a preview of that in this space. And these are aligned to standards and DOK levels. So for example, if I don't want, I'm going to say not a drag and drop, but I want DOK level 4 questions to get a sense of what these look like or how I might add them tagged to specific item types or standards. I can check these out. I can search for items aligned to that particular DOK level or specific standards. That's my last option down here. And they will then give me options that I might add to my formative. And as we've seen, I can make adjustments to these so they truly meet my needs as related to the lesson. Yes, Melissa, you can add Microsoft presentations. Apologies for not seeing the question until just now. I'll show you that in just a moment. But I do want to give you the chance to see and to experiment with and play with your item bank. It is worth noting that only standard sets that you've already imported will be searchable. So for my particular demo account, I don't have the option to search by standards because I have not yet added standard sets. I'll show you, Brandon, one sec. I'm going to jump out of my item bank to show you that this blue plus button or anywhere that you want to add an item. So if this is a familiar view, and it should be, you've got your question types, your content, upper right-hand corner next to where you would close this window is how you can access the library and the item bank. And you usually start in the library, but item bank is just a quick click away in the upper left-hand corner. So it does require that you start from a formative or from a lesson. So you have to be in one of your lessons or in one of your formatives to access the item bank. But once you are, you've got thousands and thousands of potential questions from which to draw upon, and they will come pre-aligned to standards and DOK levels. Okay, let me jump back to my home page for a moment to show you that if you want to upload your Microsoft presentations, you can do so. While we offer a quick and pretty seamless direct importation with Google, you can upload content, which is one of your quick start options from your homepage. So if I click create, I can skip lesson and formative and jump directly to upload your content. And here's where you'll be able to upload your Microsoft presentations. If you've downloaded them first as PDFs, that may go a long way, that may help. But this allows you to access materials directly. So for example, I can pull up PDFs for math or science. And this will, in a way that is very similar to your Google presentations that I demonstrated. Apologies for not knowing that you don't use presentations that way. But this pulls up those materials as PDFs and images. You can add these and they'll display as images so that you can take those same steps. So I hope that helped, Melissa. If there are follow-up questions, please let me know. And I know I'm jumping around a little bit here, but I want to point out one thing. Because we just came from the item bank, I want to point out that your account in the lower left-hand corner, and again, if you missed that, I wasn't seeing that first, but I can use the menu in the upper left-hand corner to always have access to my home page, a list of my activities, and importantly, my account settings in the lower left-hand corner. And I want to come here for a moment because I want to select my account and then settings to show you that one of the ways that you can use your item bank most successfully is to make sure that you have standards added to your account. This allows you to do a number of things, but one of those is to search the item bank by standard. So I can select the standard space here to make sure that I am adding standards from my state. In this case, I'll go Georgia. I'm going to select English, and I'm going to go with the most recent set of standards, the ones that began this year and go into who knows how long. And then select my grades. I'm going to go high school here, so I'll go group 9, 10, 11, and 12. And now I've got my Georgia ELA standards for 9, 10, 11, and 12. So now I can search for each one of those. I can use the item bank to search for questions aligned to those specific standards. Oh, thank you, Brandon, for sharing. Let me see. So you're in your library. It looks like you're still searching in the library. Here's what I'm going to ask that you do. So you're in your standards. Let me get to that in just one moment, Brandon, because I want to finish out my time on this page, and then we won't need to return to it unless there are questions that come up about it. Before I leave my standard set, I want to select Add Standard Set one more time to now type in formative so that I can select Web's depth of knowledge. And I'm going to select the DOK for across all subject areas and K-12 so that now I can also tag specific questions to not only the standards that they measure, but also to which DOK level they might assess. Okay, so let me get back to our items here. I'm going to visit my activities, and I can come back to this page if we like during our next activity break, but let me get to the item bank. I'm going to jump into any one of my activities. I'll go with this random one here. And anywhere that I can add a new item to get to a screen that looks like this, I ought to have access to the item bank in the upper right-hand corner. Brandon, I see you looking relieved. Problem solved?
Yes, thank you. That helped a lot.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm unsure as to why you can't begin in the item bank the way that you can in the library, but you can access both the library and the item bank. Only the library you can access though from your home screen. The item bank must be accessed from a particular activity, whether it's a formative or a lesson. And once you're there, I'm going to select item bank up in this space so that I'm not searching the library, but the item bank, which was purchased by the district, to make sure that you can now search by standard. Oh, I might have to refresh or log out and log back in to make sure that I can search by standard, by DOK level, by content type, question type. There are, as you can see, it looks like 23,000 resources that we can consult to make sure that our assessments, our lessons are rich and infused with items developed by content masters or experts, I would say, content experts. So, quick piece of advice here as we're thinking about lessons and adding questions that matter at specific portions of the lesson. In the beginning of the lesson, we're likely going to be trying to uh, generate hooks, get student buy-in. Brandon, you can add questions to the library, your private libraries, or you can add formatives to the public libraries, private libraries. The item bank, however, has to be overseen by a team of our content instructional designers to make sure that specific items are aligned to the standards and DOK levels that they measure. So your item bank is sort of like a more vetted list of resources. So we don't take submissions in the same way that the library would. But you can add anything to the library so that it's visible either to anyone using formative or just to folks in your district. So, in the beginning of your lesson, before we've conducted our instruction, these types of questions might be great for activating prior knowledge or assessing prior knowledge, and we'll get quick answers as to whether or not students have the requisite background knowledge to be successful with the lesson. Perhaps we have to go back to the drawing board and do some review before we move forward, and we're not waiting until the end of the lesson to recognize that if we're beginning it with some thoughtfully crafted questions that get to whether or not students have the prerequisite knowledge in order to engage in the lesson later. Now, during the lesson, after we've conducted some of our instruction, we've illustrated points, we've done some group practice together, we can ask more rigorous questions with more rigorous question types like matching, drag and drops, or hotspots where students can select different portions of an image to illustrate their understanding. And this can be for much more active processing. It can be more rigorous. So it is during these times where we might look for higher DOK levels in the middle of the lesson. Similarly, at the end, we might go for more challenging application-based questions. And we might also ask for students to do some reflecting. And it is these types of questions where students might process their information, reflect, share their ideas. And all of those that you see that are highlighted in that kind of yellow or bisque color, each of these are auto-graded. So you can add an answer key to see very quickly whether or not students have gotten that question right. So especially in the beginning and in the middle of the lesson, it's important to have data quickly so that we can make split decisions about whether to move forward, how to inform our small group work. So having questions that can be auto-graded are important, especially at those moments in the lesson. Now, to support that, I do just want to point out that lesson blocks were one of those things we did not mention, but these are designed to be templates. I'm going to get out of my item bank for a moment, and I'm going to come back to one of my presentations, or lessons rather. So here's my sample lesson that we were looking at. And I've got anywhere that I can see it, this tiny icon. Let me zoom in. This little tiny icon of the man reading the book. Kind of looks like the Iron Man logo there. That allows me to add templates to either the beginning, the middle, or end of my lesson that are aligned to what we might hope to see from students or what we might elicit from students during those portions of the lesson. So I can add to the middle of the lesson something like a pulse check, similar to the self-reflection or self-diagnosis that we started today's session with. Compare, contrast. You'll get a chance to explore these if you like during our upcoming activity break, which will be here in just a moment. But I did want to point out that in addition to those methods that we've already discussed, starting from scratch, starting from the library, you can also generate formatives from the home page. I'm going to come to my home page. to show you that underneath the create button, yes, Lori, I'm recording everything, so we'll have the chance to come back to everything that we've discussed. You can auto-generate activities to have quizzes or lessons. Just prompt it so that we know what you're looking for, and you've got the chance to have AI created materials aligned to the topic, the lesson, the suggestion that you give the technology, and there are additional settings here. So if you want to have a lesson, I will say that the lesson is much more text-based. It is designed for students to move through this lesson, more so than to be teacher-directed. So if you are auto-generating a lesson following these steps, these are much more useful for students to be reading a piece of text and then assessing their understanding of it, more so than the slides method that we've been looking at so far. But this is another opportunity for you to explore some of this technology as part of our upcoming activity break, where I'm happy to review anything we've discussed. But my last piece is to say that if you have found something, worked on something of which you are quite proud and want to share from both your lessons and your activities, you have the option underneath these three vertical dots to share materials with colleagues so that they are collaborators, or maybe they only have assign-only privileges. You can send a copy so that they must make a copy before they make any changes so that it's not affecting your original. And so that'll be the last thing that I show you. On anything that you are working on, any one of your activities, the three dots in the upper right-hand corner will allow you to share that material with collaborators and then make them either give them edit privileges or only assign privileges, and you can make the choice from that dropdown. Or you can send a copy so that that person must make a copy, thus not affecting any of the materials that you've worked on. Okay, we've arrived at our next application break. We're going to take 8 to 10 minutes for this one. Again, it's a chance for you to continue to modify the template we started with, to try any of those methods, to create lessons from scratch, or play around with the latest technology and auto-generate a lesson from some of our AI options, which are, again, best taken advantage of from the home page. That is where you get the option to create auto-generated activities. You'll notice that that is not an option available to you underneath activities. I don't know why that is. So if you want to play around with AI, visit home first and then create and auto-generate. Okay, 8 minutes, that'll bring us to 10:36. So expect to hear my voice then, and anytime somebody takes to the chat with a question. But otherwise, this is your chance to work, apply, ask questions, collaborate. And I'm going to answer Stephanie's question, but if you're sick of hearing my voice, I don't blame you. Just turn me down and expect to hear from me again at 10:36. And I'll keep the recording running so that the explanation is there on the recording for the question that Stephanie asks on how to use standards to find items in the item bank one more time. So I'm going to start from the beginning. In order to use standards to find items in the item bank aligned to those standards, we first have to make sure that our account has standards from which to draw upon. And we do that by visiting our initials or our account in the lower left-hand corner of our screen, and then selecting Settings. I can even include a link directly to this screen. So the link I just put in the chat will bring you directly to your version of your account where you can add standards sets. And I encourage you to search for the standard sets that apply to your specific circumstances. So I'll go, in this case, social studies. I'm going to select the most recent standard sets. I'll select my grade. Or in this case, it's the specific subject area once you get out of middle school. And I can see that they've been added, and I can confirm that in my standards rows. The last thing I do encourage everyone to do is to have the formative web's depth of knowledge one so that we can tag specific questions to standards as well. Sorry, to the DOK levels they measure. From here, to get to the item bank where we can use these standards to find specific items, we have to be in one of our activities, so we can access those either from the home page or the activities page. But when we are adding a specific item, so here is, I think, my PDF of my science images. Whenever I add a new item, I can add content, questions, but what you asked about, what we're after is our item bank, and that's available in this portion of your screen. And you may default to the library like I did, but you just need to click item bank to the right. And then you've got a list of filters that you can use to hone in on the questions that are best aligned to what you're hoping to find. Now, let me see if standards have worked here. I think what I would have to do is sign out and sign back in to restart. Let me see if I can do that. I'm going to try to do that quickly in this demo account. It's my hope that if you're not using a demo account, you won't have to do the same kind of sign out and sign in business. But I do want to give you a look at what it looks like to be able to draw upon your standards. Yeah, here we go. Okay, apologies. You may have to sign out and sign back in if you are not seeing those standard sets as options underneath your standards dropdown after you've added those standards. But now I can select specific standards and it will pull up items related to those standards. And I can add those or even do many at one time to add these to the formative. I hope that helps. If you want me to do that again, or if there's any questions, let me know. I'll check back in what'll be 4 minutes now. So in this section, we'll take things full circle. We'll get to the very end. We've previewed materials. We've looked at the library for inspiration. We've learned how we can import or create our own lessons from scratch in formative. Now we'll look at going those last 100 feet, getting those materials in front of students. And we're going to look at the delivery mechanisms available to us in formative, namely the present. So when we've taken the time to create materials, lessons, whether they've come from colleagues from the library or they are those that we've created for ourselves, then, oh, that's the wrong one. Here we go. The last piece is for us to present them. Students are in class. Now, let's get them in front of student eyes. And you can see I've got two options here. I can assign these materials as independent work. So to the question that came in earlier, are these designed to be for teachers or for students? If your intention is solely that students are working on these independently, you can always create an assignment, and then they would be able to access this assignment from their formative home pages. They can begin working. We'll see those responses roll in real time, and we can even organize them by the insights that they offer by using these options at the header of our formative lessons or other activities. But I want to use present because my intention is to get students working on this as I present the material in the front of the class and then to see their results roll in so it helps inform my instruction. So I've got two options here. I can go teacher paced mode, which is the one you will find yourselves using most often, I think. And then there is game paced mode. Game paced mode is a little different in that it is designed for students to move through. It's friendly competition, but it does rely on all questions being of the multiple choice variety or multiple select. It's a much more limited number of question types that are available, only because they have to be auto-graded. They have to help facilitate competition in a quick manner. So we're going to stay in teacher-paced mode today, but you may check out some Champions Challenge game-paced mode activities, as it might just give your students the chance to kind of engage in some friendly, fun competition. But from this page, we need to select a class. So I'm going to go ahead and pick my sample class here. No, Wilkerson Science. Let's do that. Now I get to select my settings. These are an important thing to linger on for a moment because the way that you set these might determine just how useful students find this lesson material beyond the date of administration. So, do you want them to be able to make changes? If so, make sure that students are allowed the chance to edit. Do you want to return scores instantly? Do you want them to not know their scores or only after the assignment is closed or after they submit? All of these are options, and they're up to you to mix and match and customize so that students get the feedback and can take action or not based on the way you want to use this lesson material. If you want students going back to it, like notes, material that they've taken notes on, then I would allow them to make edits so that wrong answers don't stick. I would also allow them to see their scores, and you might also want to make sure that correct answers are returned so that they can see those, so that they can use these materials as study materials afterwards. Now I'm going to launch this, but there's one final step. Because this is a Google Classroom account, it is going to ask me to select these, but I'm going to skip it. Now I have what we call our lobby. So I've not yet started the activity or the lesson. I'm just in my lobby. Students can join using this link, but it's also on their homepage. So if they were to sign into Formative right now, they would see this lesson ready for them to click into, and they would be moving at the pace that I determine. So when I start my lesson, they are now beholden to what I'm presenting. On their screens, they will see the slide that I am on. And I can move through these slides. And again, all students will be on the same slide as me. Their screen will display the same exact slide. I can see in this lower left-hand corner the number of students that have joined. So in this case, no students have joined yet because it's a fake class, not surprising. But this is also the screen that I can use to adjust the pace. So any students I deselect will then be allowed to move about this lesson at their own pace. So you can see the difference between Edwin being student-paced and Charlotte being teacher-paced. I can confirm these changes to allow those two students the chance to move through at their own pace. Everyone else is going to be moving with me slide by slide. So I can present the movie, or they'll be able to see the movie, and then they get to drag and drop. But you can notice, if this is the first time that students are seeing a question type like this, then they may need some guidance, some modeling on how to do this question type. And I can't do that from what I'm presenting. So what I want to do instead is use this option of broadcast mode at the bottom in my control panel down here. This broadcast option will open up in a new tab the broadcast version, or what it looks like for a student, where I can now complete this activity. Oh, and demonstrate for students what it looks like to completely or to correctly engage with this type of material. So you can see there aren't as many of the teacher-facing elements of this view as well. So if I want to present this front of class big screen in addition to what I know students are seeing on their end, I want to use that broadcast option so that things like responses aren't visible, so that these things don't get in the way of focusing student attention on what's important in the moment, which is the lesson material, the delivery of these ideas and skills. So I can continue to move through, and then perhaps at a certain point, I want to release more students, or I can also deselect all and move everyone to student paced. Or in this option where I have end session, I can also switch to student paced so that all students get the opportunity to work on it at their own pacing. So I may even design some of these lessons with a specific point at which I release all students and they continue their work after I'm moving them through my instruction. So the slides that are helping me inform and get students the practice that they need. But why formative? Why is it valuable to have these things informative? Well, that's because this responses tab will allow me the chance to see all of the student work as it comes in. I can show responses, and this will show the students and what they've done. But I can also, let me see if there's one that I can show you where we can actually see what the students have done so we can see the value here. I think that might need to be maybe one. Thank you. Let's go ahead with this one. Sorry, different demo account. What I'm going to do here is give you a sense of what our responses tab looks like. So if I am sharing a lesson informative and students are working through the questions, I will see this grid begin to fill in based on each of the responses that students are giving. So any automatically graded items will display in green or red, or if there's partial credit awarded, in yellow. And I can view how students are doing by question, either by seeing these percentages at the top row, or by clicking the actual number. And then I'll be able to see all of the student responses. And I can even toggle from responses to frequency to see those question items broken down by the distractors themselves or the correct answer. And I can see the percentages of students who got those questions right or wrong. And I can identify the students quickly who got that same question wrong by choosing the wrong distractor. And I can send them feedback all at the same time just by clicking that specific distractor or the bar graph next to that distractor. And it's these data that I might use to help know which students I need to work with more closely at the conclusion of my lesson. So I'm going to jump tabs now back over to the presentation that I am sharing with students. I'm presenting these materials, and I'm keeping my eye on the responses tab to see how students are doing and which students I might need to work with after in their like independent work time to make sure that they get the help they need based on the data they're presenting through the work they do informative. So you've got all of these great options for how you present the material. And then as students work through, you've got your eye on the results as they roll in, showing you who's getting it, who might need some additional support. You can provide feedback to either individuals or all students who answered in a similar way by taking advantage of the responses tab. And when you identify students in need of additional practice, you've got a number of ways to support them. One is, I'm going to close out of this, my broadcast view, is at the end of my lesson, when I want to end the session, I'll go ahead and I will close this assignment for my students now. We've worked through it. It's the end of the class period. So now I'm back on my home page. I've gathered data. I can see not only what they've done during the lesson, but what they've continued to do afterwards. And now I can open up any one of my activities, including the lesson I may have just been in. And in the More Options place, where we were able to share that material or send a copy, there is an option for me to generate a practice set. which uses AI. It consults the lesson materials and it prepares a set of practice opportunities for students to either reinforce their learning, to practice their learning, to get an additional opportunity to internalize the results or the material in that lesson. And I can do that with just a couple clicks by using those three vertical dots and then selecting Generate Practice Set. So I can do that from here and then assign that practice set to individuals or to the whole class. And then I can even view the amount of time that they've spent practicing those materials from my formative account as well. Now, one more thing, I want to show you that you've also got the chance to generate practice sets separate from activities. So in your navigation panel or your menu on the left-hand side, there is a space specifically for practice sets, and you can create practice sets. And I suggest the generate practice set option here because it is quite good at generating lists for students to practice on the topics that you mentioned. So we can do something like 20 cards about cell division. And then when I generate practice sets, it will use my prompts to create a list of practice opportunities for students that can be done either as flashcards, short quizzes, or even some writing exercises that will be generated and can be assigned to students. So here's a look at those. If I add these, I again have a set of these words. I can modify them any way that I like, but I can also assign these or copy them to be shared with students so that they can practice on their own. But when I assign these, I can capture data on them so I can see who spent how long practicing and what their success looked like. So that is another option for how you spend our remaining few minutes. My apologies that we do only have about 8 minutes before we wrap up today. So the last chance that we have to get this going is the experiences that I have here. And unfortunately, I apologize. Option one won't be available to us today because there is an issue with the mechanism that we created in which to deliver that one to participants. So option two is your best bet here. It is to continue working on the lessons that you've put together, to get some practice with practice sets, and continue to ask any questions that feel top of mind to us here today to make sure that we leave today feeling more confident, more comfortable in whichever arena of anything we've covered or anything that we haven't that feels best for you right now. So I'm going to pause the recording.